Thank you so much, everyone. My presentation is entitled The Oil Lamps of Ancient Dardania, Illuminations and Metaphors. I'm an art historian with a specialization in Albanian art, but my bachelor's is also in drama. So I'm an art historian and an artist, and you will see throughout the course of my presentation that my approach really marries the two worlds in my studies. So I'm glad I had the foresight to attach an abstract. My study employs critical fabulation, which I will explain in the next slide, to explore the Dardanian terracotta oil lamps of the National Museum of Kosovo, viewing them as portals to personal ancestry and broader cultural interactions. Departing from more traditional methods, it adopts a multidimensional perspective, blending poetic exercises with scientific inquiry, to bridge individual narratives with historical contexts. And by reimagining these lamps as agents of cultural transmission in their own right, the study challenges established paradigms in cultural heritage research in general, aiming to reconcile poetic or artistic and scientific elements in a comprehensive examination of identity and meaning. And I do believe this dynamic methodology can serve as a framework for progress in cultural heritage studies and approach in going forward in the future. So what is critical fabulation, everyone asks me? It's an emerging methodology, and it's a term and method coined by scholar Saidia Hartman, who really integrates research with fiction. She really looks for the fragments of information, what lies between the cracks. So you have history and fiction that addresses what is not covered by the historical or archival record. And I am personally drawn to this methodology because the Republic of Kosovo and many others have been victim to archival violence and erasure due to centuries of political turmoil. So in many ways throughout my studies, in order to question academically, I had to imagine artistically. And I did so through poetry and academic research. And why poetry? David Baker writes, "Poetry wishes. It may wish to stop or eliminate time by its eternal promises or by replacing chronology with epiphany." So I felt this pressing need to produce a coexisting sphere with its own durational time that activates the past and the present in me, through my family, and through my cultural identity, weaving one timeline into another through epiphany. So why the lamps of ancient Dardania? I was working at the National Museum of Kosovo, actually on that digitalization project, and every other artifact that I was inputting into this Excel sheet was these nondescript lamps, and they were very much presented to me as a corpus. And they were these sort of mundane everyday objects, and yet they were haunting me because they had this very potent spiritual and material implication. And eventually, the more I thought about them, they started becoming this metaphor from my grandmother, who was named Drita and passed before I was born. I inherited her name, and her name means light. Both were presented to me as a corpus, right? So the lamps as a massive artifacts shown in the museum, and my grandmother as the non-individuated compilation of Albanian womanhood as was dictated by my father's family, right? So I was looking for alternative meanings for both of these entities, moving between the collective and the genealogical. And throughout my study, it was very vexing because I kind of ended up contending with two entities that were sort of refusing to respond or give me any straight answer. So a lot of my study was sort of leading to obscurity. Every time I looked for linearity, for example, my grandmother, whenever I would ask my family about her, I was met with a shower of impassioned and contradictory information. She was kind. She was a harsh disciplinarian. She was quiet. She was a bitter housewife. She was an educated woman, having taught grade school. She hardly taught anything at all. She was from Shkoder. She was born in a village outside of the city, right? There was all of this contradictory information. And a deep irony emerges when considering the meaning of our shared name, the word for light in Albanian, which is a synonym for illumination and clarity. When exploring these lamps, there was a parallel of obscurity as well, right? Some of these lamps, when I tried to find a linearity of geography, could be traced to a Hellenistic tradition, others to a Roman imperial style. Some Herodian lamps were deriving from Judeo, others further east from Egypt and Alexandria. Were these styles absorbed into the Dardanian lamp making tradition, or are they evidence of economic exchange? Either way, they exemplified the rich cultural shifts that were happening around and through these objects. As ancient Dardania shifted from the existing consolidation of Illyrian settlements circa the Bronze Age into a period of swift Roman urbanization and eventually to being absorbed into the Byzantine Empire. That's sort of the span of these lamps, right? So what I've come to understand of these lamps is that they are not simply just born of one time, space, or stylistic tradition. And I just wanted to provide some images here. So on the upper left-hand side, you have a Flavian lamp, which is characterized by the stamp here by the air hole. You have here a Herodian lamp style, which is characterized by almost a lack of handle. You have a late Hellenistic Roman lamp characterized by a lot of these multiple nozzles. And then you have something from Asia Minor here that is the only sort of vegetal motif that we have in the corpus at the National Museum, right? So you can see there's a lot of diversity of stylistic traditions. Furthermore, many of the lamp traditions in the collection are historically wheel-made. I could not locate any studied evidence of striations. Additionally, to mass produce wheel-made lamps, an industrial-sized kiln should have been on the premises, the archaeological premises, but natural threat, human threat sort of compromises a lot of this information. For example, an earthquake destroyed Ulpiana, one of our major archaeological sites, in 518 AD, taking with it knowledge of lifeways and initiating projects of reconstruction that sort of reinscribed what we could have learned by otherwise studying something in situ. So what are the implications, right? Because rarely you have an academician sort of standing in front of a room full of people saying, I ended up with more questions than answers, right? What does that teach us? More questions than answers. And I think it taught me a lot about cultural heritage work in general, right? Which is first that there is no point of arrival. There's no finality, as matters are constantly in flux, and each culture and cultural object holds within it its own unique universe, its cluster of meaning that sort of resists conclusion in a way. Secondly, that history as such must always be challenged. We should always be pushing that envelope, for history is a complicated exchange between the individual and the collective. And lastly, cultural heritage must move into a space of creative and scientific initiatives that echo the action and practice in the world. And what do I mean by that? Reading the past, Hodder and Hudson, who are archaeologists, write that material culture is not a language at all. It is more a clearly action and practice in the world. So should not the exploration surrounding material culture or cultural heritage at large be met with action and practice? I think interdisciplinarity might add in providing the vocabulary with which to challenge fixity and embrace diverse meanings. And so I just want to sort of end with an excerpt from one of the poems in my study that I wrote to my grandmother. And you could easily almost replace Drita with cultural heritage in this, right? So perhaps I've been too concerned with what Drita means to me. Instead, what could I mean to Drita? Fixing her and her victimhood as the object of a patriarchal power system and perpetuating the exact violence that robbed her of her dimensionality to begin with. Perhaps I'm her continuum, and perhaps we are both equal participants in a continuum of light bearing. Thank you very much.